Müller-Brockmann emphasizes that both too little and too much leading can negatively impact how the text looks and, more importantly, how easy it is to read.
Okay.
If the lines are too close together, the text appears dense, blocky, and can really strain the eye. But if they're too far apart, it disrupts the connection between the lines and can make the text feel fragmented, almost floaty.
Ah, right.
Finding that sweet spot, it creates a more open and inviting feel, making the text much more pleasant to read. It's about creating the right visual texture, you could say.
So it's about finding that perfect balance where the lines are connected visually but not crowded. What about margins? They seem like just empty space around the text, but I bet they serve a purpose within the grid.
Precisely. Margins significantly influence the overall optical impression of a page. Müller-Brockmann explains that margins that are too small can make the page feel cramped and overwhelming, sort of saturated.
Yeah, I picture that.
While margins that are too large can create a sense of emptiness or wastefulness, making the text block seem isolated. He also points out the very practical consideration of the binding.
Right, like in a book.
Yeah, where the inner margins, the ones near the spine, need to be wide enough so that the text isn't lost in the crease when the document is bound or opened.
That makes perfect sense. You wouldn't want important information disappearing into the gutter. And then there are page numbers. Surely that's just a matter of placing them somewhere on the page.
Well, it might seem simple, but even the placement of page numbers has visual implications within the grid. Müller-Brockmann briefly discusses different options: top, bottom, left, or right alignment. But he emphasizes that if page numbers are placed on the sides, they should always align with the line of the main text. This maintains visual consistency and stops them from looking like, little afterthoughts just stuck on the page.
So even something as functional as a page number needs to be thoughtfully integrated into the overall grid structure. And finally, in this section, we have base text and display type. What's the key distinction there in the context of a grid?
Okay, so base text is essentially the main body copy of your design, the paragraphs you read. Display type refers to elements like headlines, subheadings, or maybe emphasized words, things that are meant to draw the reader's attention.
Got it.
Müller-Brockmann stresses the importance of maintaining unity in typeface within a design. He generally advises against mixing too many different type families, which can look chaotic.
Right. Keep it consistent.
Yeah. And he also points out that the placement and alignment of display type, like titles, should always be carefully considered in relation to the underlying grid to ensure a cohesive visual hierarchy. Everything needs to relate back to that structure.
Okay, so consistency is key, even in how we differentiate text elements. Now that we've looked at the individual components, how do you actually go about constructing the type area and the grid itself? It sounds like a deliberate process.
It is indeed. Müller-Brockmann emphasizes starting with careful sketching of the type area and ideally doing it at the actual size you'll be working with.
Why actual size?
It just helps you get a real feel for how the text will fit and flow. You can judge proportions much better. So the dimensions of your chosen paper format and the margins you decide upon, those directly determine the size and shape of your type area, the main block where content goes.
Okay, so define the container first.
Right. Once you have that defined, the next step is typically to divide it vertically into columns. Could be a single column for a simple book page, maybe 2 columns for a newsletter, or multiple columns for a more complex layout like a magazine or website.
So you start with the overall container and then break it down into vertical divisions based on the project's needs. What comes after establishing the columns?
After you have your columns set up, you then subdivide them horizontally into grid fields.
Horizontally, okay.
Yeah. This creates a finer mesh, basically. You could have a grid of, say, 8 fields or 16, 20, even 32 fields or more per column or page. These fields create a framework for precisely placing both text and images.
More fields means more options.
Exactly. Müller-Brockmann notes that while a grid with more fields offers greater flexibility in your design, it also requires more discipline. Otherwise, you risk creating a cluttered or confusing layout.
Right. Too much freedom can be chaotic.
Precisely. He also highlights how the height of your text lines, the leading we talked about, and the vertical spacing between these grid fields are interconnected. This allows for a harmonious alignment of different elements. For example, the baseline of your body text might align with certain horizontal grid lines, and maybe the bottom of your headlines align with others.
So it's a process of progressively dividing the space to create an adaptable yet highly organized structure. Now, many designs incorporate more than just text. How do you integrate photography and illustrations within this grid system effectively.
Yeah, that's a good point. Müller-Brockmann acknowledges that photographs are often initially conceived outside of a strict grid. A photographer isn't usually thinking about grid lines when they take a picture.
Right.
However, he emphasizes the significant benefits of collaboration between photographers and designers. The goal is to ensure that photographic elements can be effectively integrated with the grid.
How would that work?
Well, it might involve the photographer composing shots with the grid in mind, maybe using a grid overlay on their camera screen, or even a physical grid structure during the shoot. Or, more commonly perhaps, the designer adapting the grid layout to accommodate existing photography in a structured way.
Okay. And illustrations?
For illustrations, they can often be consciously designed to fit within specific grid fields. And using consistent background colors that align with the grid can further enhance visual unity. He also shows how a well-designed grid can accommodate illustrations of various sizes while still maintaining an overall sense of order on the page. You might combine several grid fields to hold a larger image, for example.
So it's about finding ways to make these visual elements work in concert with the underlying structure, rather than just treating them as separate things stuck onto the page. Now, you mentioned some real-world examples of grid application earlier. Can you share a few more specific cases from the book?
Certainly. Müller-Brockmann's book itself is packed with examples, which is great. He highlights, for instance, the Opposition's Journal, which apparently used a 15-field grid to create a consistent and structured layout across its issues.
Okay.
Another really compelling example he discusses is the design for the Munich City of the Olympic Games 1972 booklet.
Ah, the 72 Olympics. That design is iconic.
It really is. And here, the designers used both 16 and 20 field grids to achieve this visually dynamic yet very ordered arrangement of text and those vibrant four-color illustrations. It definitely contributed to the whole iconic look of those games.
It's fascinating to realize there was such a structured system behind that seemingly playful aesthetic. Any other examples that illustrate the grid's adaptability?
Yeah, definitely. He discusses the book design work of a designer named Sugiura in Japan. The challenge there was integrating traditional Japanese characters, written vertically, with Western names written horizontally in the Latin alphabet.
Oh, wow. How did he manage that?
Sugiura cleverly adapted a grid system to accommodate both. He often consistently placed the Western names, for example, between two specific horizontal grid fields relative to the Japanese text, creating a visual bridge between the two scripts. It's really elegant.
That's clever.
He also showcases a catalog for History of Swiss Art Typography. That used an 18-field grid, but with varying column widths, a wider one for the main text and a narrower one for accompanying footnotes or annotations.
Ah, providing a clear hierarchy.
Exactly, a clear visual hierarchy for different levels of information. And finally, he touches on using grids in things like brochures, emphasizing how they ensure you leave adequate space for folds and how they allow for flexible layouts by letting you combine multiple grid units to fit different amounts of text or images.
These examples really bring the abstract principles of the grid to life, don't they? And demonstrate its versatility across diverse design challenges and even cultural contexts. Now, shifting our focus to a larger scale, corporate identity. How vital is a well-defined grid system in establishing a strong and cohesive brand image for a company?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental.
All right,
According to Müller-Brockmann, he argues that a comprehensive corporate identity system must encompass all of a company's communication materials.
everything.
Everything. The grid system acts as the underlying framework, the visual glue, that ensures consistency across the board. Letterheads, business cards, websites, ads, packaging, you name it. The goal is to develop a core concept and a flexible grid that not only solves immediate design needs in a consistent, objective way, but also serves as a long-term visual program, something that reflects the company's core values and philosophy.
And flexibility is key, you said?
Flexibility is crucial, yeah, because the grid needs to be adaptable enough to handle future, potentially unforeseen communication needs. Ideally, he says, even the design of the cover and the interior pages of a company's publications should be developed together based on this unifying grid.
So the grid acts as the invisible architecture that underpins the entire visual identity of a brand, ensuring recognition and reinforcing its message across all touchpoints. That makes perfect sense for building brand loyalty and trust. Now, you also mentioned that the principles of grid systems extend beyond the two-dimensional realm of print and digital design. How does the concept of the grid apply to three-dimensional design in exhibitions?
Yeah, the principles translate surprisingly well into spatial design. They provide a means for objective organization and clear presentation in 3 dimensions. Müller-Brockmann gives a very practical example, dividing interior surfaces of an exhibition stand into equal-sized modules.
Like panels.
Exactly, like modular panels. This allows for easy assembly, disassembly, and maybe even reconfiguration for different shows. It makes things efficient and predictable.
Okay.
He also traces the evolution of exhibition design from the more ornate styles of the past to the systematically designed stands that became prominent at Swiss trade fairs in the 1950s. The Olivetti exhibition stand is highlighted as a particularly successful example, a consistently and functionally designed space based entirely on grid principles.
Olivetti, right. Their design was always very clean.
Very clean, very structured. Similarly, he mentions a mobile exhibition called Germany's Way that used a simple grid and prefabricated elements for ease of transport and setup, demonstrating the grid's power in creating adaptable and coherent three-dimensional experiences.
So it's about bringing that same sense of order, modularity, and visual coherence to physical spaces, making them more efficient and easier to navigate and understand. It's fascinating to see how this fundamental principle transcends different dimensions. Finally, Müller-Brockmann kind of zooms out, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He delves into the broader context of order systems throughout history. It seems like this human desire for structure and organization is really deeply ingrained.
Exactly. He even quotes the famous architect Le Corbusier, who stated, "The real key to life is order."
Wow. Strong statement.
It is. Müller-Brockmann draws connections between the use of grids in design and the order systems we observe everywhere in nature, like crystal structures or plant growth. In music, referencing the mathematical harmonies discovered way back by Pythagoras, and even in the proportions of the human body, think of the golden section.
Right, the golden ratio.
Yeah. He points out how Renaissance artists consciously used principles of measure and proportion in their compositions. You see grid-like structures appearing in symbols and logos throughout history.
Any specific examples?
Well, the iconic pictograms designed for the Swiss Federal Railways, for instance, they were created using a strict square grid. It's a fantastic example of how a simple grid can achieve remarkable systematization and clarity for universal communication. Everyone understands those symbols instantly.
Yeah, they're incredibly clear.
He even touches upon the application of order systems in typography, way back since Gutenberg and movable type. In modern urban planning, he mentions examples like Mileto and Le Corbusier's Plan Voisin for Paris.
Planning whole cities on a grid.
Exactly. And in various art forms like architecture, ornamentation, sculpture, he cites the work of Max Bill and painting. Think of Pete Mondrian's very grid-based abstract art, all illustrating how underlying mathematical principles of proportional relationships contribute to a sense of harmony and sometimes visual tension.
It really is everywhere once you start looking.
It is. Even in product design, he argues, the functionality and form of everyday objects, like chairs, are often tied to these principles of order and proportion.
It's really eye-opening to see how this fundamental desire for order and structure manifests itself across so many different fields and throughout human history. It certainly puts the modern graphic design grid system into a much broader and more meaningful context. And Müller-Brockmann concludes by emphasizing the crucial role of logical and systematic thinking underpinned by the grid in creating effective and aesthetically pleasing design, highlighting the importance of intellectual rigor alongside creative intuition.
Yes, he makes a very compelling argument for the enduring power of thoughtful structure as the bedrock of impactful visual communication. It's not about stifling creativity, but channeling it effectively.
So as you can see, the seemingly simple grid is, well, actually a really powerful and versatile tool. It has a rich history and pretty profound implications for how we understand and interact with visual information in just about every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. We've really only scratched the surface of the wealth of knowledge contained in Systemus de Res Oculus, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the intentionality and underlying structure that contributes to effective design all around you.
Think about how these principles might apply, to the presentations you create or the documents you work with, the websites you navigate, even the way information is organized in your own workspace, perhaps. What stands out to you now as the most surprising or insightful takeaway from our exploration of grid systems?
It's interesting, isn't it? This journey into grid systems really reveals how a framework that might seem purely technical or even restrictive can actually unlock greater clarity, enhance creativity, and lead to much more impactful communication. It encourages us to look beyond just the surface appearance and appreciate the underlying order that contributes to that sense of harmony and understanding in the visual world.
For those of you who are eager to delve even deeper into this fascinating subject, Grid Systems by Josef Müller-Brockmann is a truly foundational text. Exploring its pages firsthand will undoubtedly offer even more valuable insights and probably quite a few aha moments.
Definitely worth checking out. And maybe a final thought. What other systems of order, perhaps less obvious than the visual grid, silently shape and influence the world around you in unexpected ways?